Welcome to Willow Healing Matters, the podcast. We are so excited to have you joining us on this journey where we explore different ways to empower your soul, whether it's healing in your kitchen or all the way up in the corporate world. Come with us as we look into different ways to heal your mind, body, and soul. Hi everyone, it's Catherine from Willow Healing, and I am honoured to have the beautiful Petrea King with us today. So she's the CEO and founder of Quest for Life Foundation, which she established in 1989 after a series of personal traumas stretching back to childhood. Petrea established the Quest of Life Centre in Bundanoon in 1998. And the Quest of Life Centre hosts 32 5-day residential programs and dozens of workshops in rural, regional, and remote Australia each year. Petrea is a best-selling author of 9 books and a dozen meditation practices. She's a frequent keynote speaker, a facilitator, teacher, and trainer, and for the past 24 years has been a monthly guest on ABC Sydney's Midweek conference with Richard Glover, where they discuss the challenges of living well in challenging situations. You would have had a lot to talk about the last few years. And then Petrea has received the Advanced Australia Award, Citizen of the Year, and the Centenary Medal for her contribution to the community. She has been nominated for Australian of the Year each year since 2003, as well as being a New South Wales finalist for Senior Australian of the Year in 2011. In 2003, she was celebrated on Channel 9's This Is Your Life and has been featured twice on the Australian Story Compass and many other television and radio productions. So a big welcome, Petrea, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's lovely to be with you, Catherine. Thank you.
So I know that do you want to share a bit about what Quest for Life does and how you actually came about wanting to establish this beautiful centre and the offerings that it has?
Well, many years ago, back in the 80s, I was given a terminal diagnosis from acute myeloid leukemia, and I ended up in a tiny little cave outside of Assisi in Italy, where St. Francis used to retreat to. And this elderly priest who didn't speak English and I didn't speak Italian, he took care of me and cooked for me and looked after me. And, you know, when you nearly die and then you don't, you know that happiness is not about the stuff. And so when I didn't die, I was faced with, well, how do you live a life worth living? And especially given that I was only in what the doctor said was a remission that wouldn't last. And so I had my whole life all packed up in this little suitcase, all ready for the big trip. And then the plane got cancelled, and I was faced with, how much do you unpack? How do you live with any confidence in life when you know that life can change in a breath, in a phone call, in a moment, and it's never the same again? And so I, first of all, opened my home to other people who were dealing with life-threatening illnesses. So in the 80s, I mostly worked with people with cancer and AIDS and motor neurone disease and Parkinson's and MS, both as a naturopath, but also I drew a lot on my previous history. I'd had years in hospital. I'd been in a violent relationship. I'd been sexually assaulted when I was 17. So there were a whole bunch of other things that had happened that had kind of pushed me into parts of myself I wouldn't willingly go and explore. But they also provided a wonderful background of experience to meet other people who were dealing with their own despair, their own helplessness, hopelessness, powerlessness, given the situation that they were in. And so it really grew from my sunroom. We used to have 200 people through the sunroom every week in 10 support groups and meditation groups, and in my individual practice as a naturopath. And then it gradually expanded. Ultimately, we moved to Bundanoon. This beautiful place came on the market, and some wonderful people made it possible for us to purchase and refurbish it so that it's suitable for the purpose that we use it now. And so given that I was given a safe space in which to unravel and heal, because I'd sat on a lot of trauma all my life and kept the facade up that convinced everyone, I hoped, that I was okay, given that I was a blithering emotional wreck behind that. And they helped me to heal myself, really.
Yeah. And I guess that's a lot of people don't realize the impact of trauma, even from such a young age. We see a lot more kids going through different traumas, and a lot of people just dismiss it.
Mm. Well, people think that, they're too young to understand, and they may very well be too young to understand, and they don't have a long history and perspective to bring to that trauma. So, but rest assured that the body never lies, and it goes in through our consciousness and is delivered to every cell of our body. The consequences of whatever trauma, or it can be as much issues around omission as commission. So sometimes a child being ignored or not being held or loved or cuddled or told that they're loved can have a huge impact. So those areas of omission are equally traumatic as areas of commission, where there may have been physical, sexual, emotional abuse of a child, which also often helps a child to split off parts of themselves into these other areas that may be able to cope with the trauma. Um, but that has a very long-term consequence, and certainly needs a safe environment in which the person can find a pathway to their own healing.
Yeah, and definitely, like, I think we underestimate as a society how much these emotional events in our life end up manifesting physically in our body. And I use the word manifesting because if we continue ignoring it and pushing it down in a box, which we're being told to do, then it does bloom into something else that we don't necessarily want in our body and to happen that way.
Yes. Yes. Well, we know, just in the last few years, young children who are deprived of seeing facial expressions because of masks,
Yep.
it's literally impacted their intelligent quotient, their IQ, by 20 points.
Yeah.
And then we find on top of that, Florida has just outlawed fluoridation of the water for the same reason, that it interferes with the intellectual development of children. And so Florida has had the courage to actually ban fluoridation. And I'm sure that we'll see other states in America and hopefully here in Australia that we follow suit.
Yeah. And I guess too it's like all these things that we're putting in our body and not nourishing it and giving it what it needs to thrive. And I love that you've created a space where people can come and get nourished on all levels.
Yes, I think that's so important, that we address the whole person, and that means, you're not your body, but you do have one. You need to nourish it appropriately. You need to rest it. You need to exercise it. You're not your brain, but you've got one, and you need to be able to use your brain, not be used by your brain. You're not your thoughts, you have them. You're not your feelings, you have them. So it's really about how to come back into right relationship with your physical body, but also with the traumas and the upsets and challenges that happen in any lifetime, to turn those into grist for the mill rather than something that we just stuff down, as I did very, very capably for the first 33 years of my life. Because I don't think I'd ever wept up until I was nearly dead.
Yeah.
And there had been much to weep about, including my brother's suicide and some of those other things that I talked about. But in our family, it was almost like no matter what happens, you have to cope and be stoic and not show emotion. And, that's quite a heavy burden for all of us to bear. And that's why we need a supportive, nurturing environment in which we can utter the unutterable and have it heard and witnessed and not judged. And then we can help people to find their own best answer. It's not our answer. We don't know what's best for people. And that would be a terrible presumption to think that we know what's best for another human being. But we can certainly educate them in how the brain works, how the spirit works, and how we can actively participate in our lives in a way that brings us to greater illumination and enlightenment, as well as peace of mind.
Yeah, and it's about, I feel too, finding that truth, finding your truth and finding people around you that are going to empower you and support you in that truth rather than put their truth on you.
Exactly. Exactly. And so another important aspect of our model is that the people who work on our teams, even though they might have all kinds of bits of paper on the wall from their professional achievements, if they haven't suffered, they won't be able to work here, because it's really the people who've been in the dark places, in the places of despair and anguish and helplessness and powerlessness and hopelessness, that make the best companions for other people who've only recently stumbled into that arena themselves. And so, whilst their professional qualifications are really important, equally important is their heart and their wise heart from having explored and integrated their own suffering in their own lives.
Yeah, and it's really that life experience that helps you develop that compassion rather than just the sympathy, because you've been through it and you understand. And you can say, I
Yes,
understand from a whole heart place rather than just, oh, yeah, I understand.
yeah, indeed. And that's so important. And I say to them pretty much every week, look, we would absolutely support you in staying feeling miserable and despairing and desperate and unhappy, because what happened to you is terrible. But you know, like I know, that that's not going to change anything. And you didn't come here for a pity party. You came here because there's a part of you that already knows that you can be more than whatever has happened to you. And for me, that company of people who refuse to be defined by the appalling, dreadful, horrible, tragic things that have happened to them is testament to the human spirit and our capacity, when we join together and come with open hearts and free of judgment, that we can all shed a bit of light on one another's paths so that we can all find our way home. And that's what we see repeated week after week after week in our programs. And it's incredibly inspiring and heartwarming to see people able to inspire and encourage each other in that healing journey.
Yeah, and I saw this beautiful meme the other day, and it said, through all the things that we go through, you need to face it, feel it, and heal it so that you can move on and keep growing yourself on a soul level. And that's truly, when I heard about your program, that was something that I loved that you shared with people, is that you want them to come out not saying this never happened to me, but rather this happened to me, I fought through it, I healed that, and now I can be a better version of myself and have that compassion to share that journey with other people.
Yes, isn't that wondrous that human beings, really, because we hear such stories of tragedies and, losing children and murder and suicide and assault and cruelty and, all of these things that happen to in the human condition. Humans are capable of such incredible compassion and also such incredible cruelty. So, how do we reconcile ourselves with that? And how do we choose to align ourselves with love rather than bitterness and regret and resentment and blame and shame and all of those other feelings that are equally valid, um, but they're not helpful to us when we get stuck in those feelings. We need to process those feelings, fully feel them. If you can feel it, you can heal it.
Yes.
And so we need to find ways of skillfully feeling these feelings, so that one of the processes that we use on our program is called the mansion of emotion. And when we meditate, it gives us the capacity to witness ourselves having the feeling rather than identifying as the feeling. So there's a little 3-step or sometimes a 4-step process. This is how it feels to be Petrea, feeling rage, for instance. The second step is to give yourself permission to feel it. So the first one is identify the feeling. And sometimes it's not one feeling, it's a little smorgasbord of feelings, a bit of shock, a bit of fear, a bit of confusion. So this is how it feels to be Petrea, feeling fear, shock, confusion. The second step is we give ourselves permission to feel that way. It's okay to feel like this. And this is how feeling fear, confusion, shock feels for me. And so we witness how that feels in our body. We recognize, oh, yeah, I can feel it in my stomach. I can feel it in my chest. I can feel the tears in my eyes. I can feel them running down my cheeks. Yep, this is the feeling of shock, fear, confusion, rage, anger, whatever it might be. So that we're in relationship with it, we allow the feeling to be processed. And sometimes there's a fourth step of I need to go for a walk. I need to soak in a bath. I need to make an appointment with my counsellor. I need to go back to Quest, whatever it might be, that gives people a way of working through those feelings rather than I am angry, I am scared, I am. So we encourage people, don't attach a feeling to I am.
Yeah.
Maybe I am soul, spirit, life, being, energy, consciousness, and right now I'm feeling despair. It's not who I am. It is what I am feeling.
Yeah.
And that's a huge difference. And gradually the I am becomes our rock solid reality. And from that reality, we witness ourselves move in and out of feelings all the time, knowing that they're not who we are, but they are what we are feeling.
Yeah, and I feel too that's that, again, acknowledging that you're allowed to have feelings and you're allowed to let them come up, and instead of putting them back down into that little box or squishing them back down, it's letting them come out. And yes, it might be that whole suffering through that emotion, but until you feel it and you can heal it, it's going to keep coming back up, and that box can only hold so much before it explodes. So why not do it on your
Yeah.
terms and get your power back, and get that power back from letting them control you?
Exactly, exactly. And the thing is, if we don't process this, then we tend, those unprocessed feelings can trigger our reactions. And we talk a lot in our programs too about the difference between a response and a reaction. And when we're in the midst of a reaction and we ask people, how old do you feel? They say usually somewhere between 2 and 7.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't really want to bring a 2 to 7-year-old to an adult interaction because we've suppressed something from the past and pushed it down. And when people come near that, we tend to react to either push them away or to scare them off with our size, our bluster, our volume, rather than be able to witness the feeling, process, recognize the feeling, process it, and not blame the other person who may have triggered that feeling. Maybe they're a wonderful teacher to you because maybe they're the only person on the planet who can bring to consciousness whatever is submerged in you and in need of healing.
Mm-hmm.
So it begins to turn those experiences into healing opportunities rather than things that we want to avoid. That's on a good day, you have to be in good shape to see it that way, because more often than not we tend to just react to the person and we either explode to push them away through our size, bluster, volume, or we implode and tell ourselves how useless, hopeless, helpless, worthless we are, that we should be better than this, we should be more than this. And so I love that principle of attitudinal healing, that I can always perceive anger in myself or in others as a call for help rather than as an attack. Because if we can see it as a call for help, then we're able to respond with compassion rather than just react back with our own little arrows that we pull out of our quiver and send back because someone's been angry with us. And then we can see maybe we've just come close to a part of that person that they don't know how to be with, and they sure and all don't want you poking around in it, and so they will push you away from that part of themselves. Or we blame ourselves and tend to implode rather than explode.
Yeah, and it's about, that spiritual and emotional growth, that emotional development, that you can start to pick up those signs in yourself. And often learning about who you are as a person, through all these extra, like astrology, numerology, human design. There's so many things now that can teach us to help us understand how we are. So I know when things aren't in alignment with me, I get really frustrated. And that's my thing of like, oh, this isn't in alignment with me, and this is really poking my buttons because this is not resonant with who I am. Whereas my husband and my son, they get really bitter. And I'm like, oh, I think I prefer the frustration over the bitterness, but we'll just balance it out that way. But, often when we take that time to learn about ourselves and nourish ourselves through, who are we, then that helps us get that emotional growth, so that when we do go through those events or traumatic events, we can recognize the strength we have in ourselves and how to ask for help, and what are the signs that we need that assistance as well.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, we think of it as it's second nature to us to react in particular ways. But it's funny that we call it second nature. You'll hear people often say, oh, it's second nature for me to think like this, feel like this, react like this. No one ever questions, well, what's your first nature? What was there before you took on those wounds, those beliefs, those judgments about yourself, about others, about life? And really, the purpose of human existence is to relinquish everything that's become second nature to us, so that we reveal and experience and live from our first nature, our essential nature. And this is as much about the brain as anything else, because we have a part of the brain that gets laid down early in life and then gets reinforced, and that's called the default mode network. And that's what is our ego. That's the unconscious. That's the little voice in our head that is forever chattering to us until it doesn't, that projects into the future, into the past. And we have another part of the brain, the neocortex, the task positive network. And when that's online, you've got access to qualities like insight, intuition, wisdom, humor, spontaneity, creativity, compassion. And those are the qualities of your first nature, your essential nature. So the task positive network is really the bridge to our spirit, because when it's engaged, we've got access to the field of which each of us is an individuated expression. Whereas if we're only dealing with the default, then we can only deal with our past and what we made of it.
Yeah.
And so really the human journey is often facilitated through suffering, because our default mode network gets so painful that we get to a place where we say, that's it, something has to change, and it's me. I can't change what happened. I can't change my childhood, my parents, the tragedies, the traumas, the things that shouldn't have happened, but they did, things that I didn't imagine could happen, but they did. So I can't change any of that, but I can change how I choose to see those experiences and how I choose now to respond to those experiences. I refuse to be a helpless victim of my history. And that's a very inspiring company to be in. And that's the journey that we're all on. And that can change our view of suffering on a good day, to not see it as an appalling, dreadful, horrible thing that shouldn't have happened, but maybe instead of it happening to me, it happened for me. And maybe there's something here that I can learn about life. Because we keep thinking that we're here for the relationships, the possessions, the stuff of life. And really, we're here to live our life via those things, to really relinquish what has become second nature, to heal what's become second nature to us, so that we can be in service to life through our essential nature instead.
Yeah, and when we sit in that pain and that suffering, if you choose to ignore it, the universe will just keep repeating the same thing to you again and again and again until you get the message and until you learn that lesson. It's like until you step back and go, "Oh, this is happening again. Why is this happening again?
Yeah.
And what can I change this time? What can I change? Not someone else. What can I change?"
Yeah.
Then you will learn that shift, and then you will start to move more into that positive mindset rather than starting that negative victim loop that we were just discussing.
Exactly. Exactly. And of course, victimhood is so seductive. You know, there's lots of juice to be got out of feeling sorry for ourselves and seeing how many other people we might pull into our story as well. But after a while, it's like I don't want to be defined by the the traumas and the tragedies that have happened in my life. I know I can be more than all of those things. That's one of Wendy's favourite quotes is, I know I can be more than this, whatever it is. And I think that's something that we all know, but sometimes we do get stuck in being a victim because we can't see a pathway out. And I think that's what happens on our programs, that people recognize a part of themselves that they may not have identified for a long time. And they recognize that while they may be in a very painful experience in their life, that they're also learning some amazing things about life too. Though, you know, grief helps you clarify your priorities. Who are your friends? Who are the people who can really be there in the hard places in life? Who are the people that will show up, and who are the people that would rather cross the street? That can be almost another shock on top of grief as well, because sometimes the very people that you thought would be there disappear, and the people that you didn't know so well come out of the woodwork because they know about that suffering and they know how to be present to someone who's experiencing that kind of suffering, and they become really wonderful companions on the journey. I know there's a couple of women who came here with their husbands 20 years ago, and both their husbands had cancer. Both their husbands ultimately died. And these two women are fast friends today. They've travelled the world together. I've lost count of the number of overseas trips that they've had together because they became friends for life. You know, that they traversed that very painful area of grief of both losing their soulmates, but they've found this deep friendship born of suffering, that is now one of great joy and great depth and friendship. So love moves in very mysterious ways, and we can't second guess it. Love is an extraordinary force in the world, and human beings, that's who they are in their essence, and that's pretty amazing. And it's amazing to me how suffering is often the pathway to finally come home to ourselves.
Yeah. I had a client recently passed away from inoperable brain tumors, and his wife stood up to give the eulogy, and it was so beautiful because she actually started it. This is what cancer taught us, you know, and she truly had was holding this space, like she's such this courageous mom, you know, still doing her job, running his business, you know, picking up the kids, looking after the kids, but was still at his side 24/7, you know, still managing to do all these things. And she goes, but I learned courage from him, and he was the courageous one, not me. And this beautiful love that came from that, and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't all about the suffering. It was about, okay, this is what we learned from this time and extra time that we got together, because she fought so hard and he was such a warrior too. And it was truly learning that growth. And now she's coming out the other side, and she's like, you know, spiritually, she's like, I'm ready to talk to him. Can you teach me and help me learn? And I'm like, yes, let's connect on that level too. So, you know, it's often that empowerment from the suffering. And I was so amazed and just misty from, like, crying from this speech, because it was so beautiful. It's from the heart, and it was, like you said, learning through that suffering and moving out and finding a higher reason to be. You know, like now she wants to become a patient advocate, and, you know, finding these really powerful messages in the lessons
Wonderful.
that went through. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's an untapped resource in healing. I don't think the medical profession gets it, that it's really your ability to be present, deeply present, to the person that you're with and to read all of the signs, both visible, both auditory, but also all of the subtle signs that people convey how they're actually feeling in their energetic field, for instance, that we can often pick up what's going on for people. And if we can find a way of articulating that and giving it back to them in some way that's useful to them, oh, what a joy that is, and what a benefit and a blessing that is for the person as well. So, yes, even after 40 years of doing this work, I feel incredibly grateful and humble just at the privilege of being invited into other people's
Yeah.
most tender areas. And unfortunately, at the moment, although I suspect it will shortly change, but at the moment, medicine is becoming more and more formulaic, that this disease equals this treatment, and it's really a press of a button to get whatever the most recent protocol for that disease is. It's not actually about the person, it's about the disease. And I think we need to shift that mindset and give doctors back the capacity to practice the art of healing rather than this formulaic way where you get into trouble if you don't do it the way that everybody else is doing it, as if we're only treating a disease rather than treating a person.
Yeah, and it's coming back to that holistic model of medicine, where does this actually come from? And I remember even when I was at university, we got taught, and we got taught this in the lecture, that the Eastern model of medicine looks at a person as a whole and tries to find the cause of the illness, whether it's emotional, like a toxin or things like that. Whereas the Western side of medicine just treats the symptom. It doesn't actually look any further and underneath. And that is something that I've seen even throughout my life and working as in allied health and even as myself as a person, where I'm like, no, there's something else here. I'm going to trust my instinct and follow my gut and know that this isn't the right treatment or this isn't the right path for me. I'm going to find something else. And often by honoring that and following that, that has led to my greater level of healing, and rather than just taking the medication in the box or something like that. So, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And, I think it also would bring so much greater satisfaction to practitioners if they were allowed to practice the art of healing rather than this formulaic way, because I know many, many doctors who are dear friends, and I know that's what distressed a lot of doctors in the early days of COVID, that, to give the instruction of don't do anything until you can't breathe, then go to the hospital, was so against the way a doctor practices medicine. You're always looking to ease the suffering of this person. And of course, there were many things that could have been used to ease the suffering of COVID, and many of the doctors felt very thwarted. In fact, I ran an online support group for 50 doctors back in the early days of COVID, doctors here in Australia and New Zealand and occasionally other countries as well, who were feeling so dispirited because they couldn't treat people. They just knew something wasn't right here, but they couldn't put their finger quite on what it was at that time. But they were very distressed that they were instructed virtually not to treat people until they were so sick they had to go to the hospital. And that was just an anathema to most of the doctors that I know who are really passionate about integrative health and treating the whole person. So there are many doctors who are very more than open to that. They've been practicing that kind of medicine for decades without a great deal of support or encouragement. And I think that's the area that really needs to change, because when people go to the doctor, they want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be held in that vibration that I'm here to be in service to you and how to help you to attain the best physical, mental, emotional, spiritual well-being that is possible.
Yeah. And that would be such a beautiful change to see in the world, just that shift of how patients are treated, but also how people are seen rather than just another patient or just another number or a Medicare number or,
Yeah.
or whatever it might
Or
be.
another gallbladder
And
or another breast cancer or
yeah.
yeah. I remember many years ago when I ran a retreat for doctors, and there were about 20 in the group, and one of them came late and kind of threw himself into a chair. And when it came to his turn to say why he was there and what he wanted out of the time, oh, we were all completely taken aback by what he said. But he said, I can only leave the house in the morning by having an argument with my wife. I go to the hospital, I'm always running late for my surgical list. I chop off breast after breast after breast all day. I go home and have another argument with my wife. I don't even know who my teenage children are, and I can't see why life's worth living. And it was just so tragic to hear someone, but also so courageous to say that out loud in front of his colleagues. And, we were able to get a good deal of help for him because he was really in a place of uh, deep despair at that time and was a candidate for suicide. So we were able to put a lot of support around him and cancel his surgical list for the next week. Because a lot of these doctors, they can feel very trapped in a rural area where they are the only breast surgeon in this case, and there's no escape. And there's no self-care, there's no self-respect even for them to recognise what an important job that they get to do in their life, but they have to do that from a well-replenished, wise, compassionate space inside of themselves rather than just feeling trapped by the role that they've got themselves into without a lot of thought or consciousness.
Yeah. And like you said, how brave for him to see that and be there and own that before
Yeah.
it consumed him. And I guess,
In,
yeah.
in fact, during the program, I saw him lying on the lawn down at the outside on the front lawn of the centre. And then he came back up and he said, when I was a little boy, I used to lie on the grass and make shapes out of the clouds. He said, where's that little boy gone? And he just dissolved into tears and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed in my arms. And it was so profoundly healing, and such a turning point for him to recognize that he'd done nothing to nourish that spirit of his for so long, and it just got bogged down in family and work commitments and an unrealistic workload that was enough to sap anyone's spirit.
Yeah. And that's, I guess, where we were talking about again and how important it is to have a counsel around you. And I often say, even when you're in a good space in your life, that's a time to sit down and actually make your list of where I can go and where I can seek help if, I go back down that path, or I'm feeling that despair again, or I'm feeling questioning my life, and having that in place then. So then if you ever let's face it, life is full of ups and downs. No matter how spiritually awake you are, you keep getting things thrown at you to keep making you grow, so but knowing, like, okay, if my health's not right, I can go see this naturopath who I trust, or I can go get this massage with this person, or I can go, I know that if, I'm feeling anger or rage, I can go book in another session at Quest, or, whatever it might be. But making that plan for yourself and knowing that you're not alone,
Exactly. And I think when people, I'm always amazed that people will travel from all over Australia and sometimes from countries beyond just to find a safe place in which they can utter the unutterable and have it heard and witnessed by complete strangers without judgment, without advice, without anything, just accepting that is your story. And, that's just so amazing to me. But on the other hand, when we think about human history, human beings have been gathering together in a circle, usually staring into a fire. And for tens of thousands of years, we've told each other stories around the fire in that circle. And now we tend to sit around the flickering box of the telly and we don't talk to each other. And we don't focus on those deeper conversations about life, about love, about the challenges that we might experience. And that's where we learned from one another. And so I think the circle that we create here at Quest is an ancient memory that we all have, that we've all gathered together around women, have definitely gathered together around the mending, the minding, the making for tens of thousands of years, and they've talked to each other, and that's where we've learnt from each other. It's where we've supported one another, encouraged, uplifted one another. And so in a way it might be a very unique environment, because anyone that comes to Quest says there's nothing like this anywhere in the world, which I believe at the moment, unfortunately, is true. But it also taps back into an ancient history of humanity gathering together and shedding inspiration, encouragement, support, and love to one another in that safe confine of the crucible of humanity coming together to share in the journey of life, and what is the purpose of that. So, it may be a new phenomenon, but it's born of an ancient thing that we've all done for tens of thousands of years.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, when you look back on how stories are passed through generations, through those more indigenous tribes, it's all about sitting around a fire and sharing the stories and the songs and helping you learn. And, even we have those moments, even, in modern culture where you get shared, like, a fable or things like that. And you think, that we forget to share those things these days. Like, there's always a deeper lesson in what's happening.
Yeah, it's super important that we remember that, because otherwise it leads to profound loneliness. And there are so many people now who feel deeply disconnected from themselves and from everyone else. And it does take courage to be vulnerable, to be raw, to be honest in the company of other people. And that's why I admire these people so much, and they learn so much from one another and provide that insight for one another in really powerful ways. And now, of course, we understand the brain a little bit better, and we understand the human condition a little bit better. For instance, we know that when you use an encephalograph, you're putting nodes on the actual brain to read what's going on in the brain. But when you use a magnetoencephalograph, that's measuring what happens just outside the body. And what they find is that thought actually starts out here in the field before a neuronal pathway starts up in the brain. And so it begins to help people, if we can educate people, that you actually have access to the field of consciousness of which you are an individuated expression. And why wouldn't you tap into that vast arena of knowledge and wisdom and insight and compassion, rather than just resolving to use your own history to look for insight, when your history may have been tainted by all kinds of experiences that are not the truth of who you are in your essence. And that return journey is really what all of us are here. It's not that some of us are fitting this in a little bit on the side. It is the purpose of all human existence, is to make the return journey back home to our essential nature and reconnect with the sacred, the divine, in whatever way an individual sees that. Life, love, spirit, soul, consciousness, doesn't really matter what you call it. But that's the good news that was written about in the Bible, that we are actually eternal beings, and we don't have to identify ourselves as bodies, because they get grey and wrinkly and bits fall off and don't work as you get older. So you don't want to think that's who you are. And your feelings change all the time. So you don't want to identify yourself as a feeling. I am rage or I am despair. So you don't want to identify that way. We want that much larger version of ourselves, that we are born of spirit. We are able to bring spirit into our daily lives by engaging the neocortex, where we have access to insight, intuition, wisdom, humour, spontaneity, creativity, compassion, because those are the qualities of your essential nature rather than what's become second nature to you.
Exactly. All right, as we finish our time up together, Petrea, I always ask people if they could change something in the world or heal something in the world, what would it be?
Oh, my
Only
word.
just one thing. Just one thing.
Oh, just one thing. I'd like everybody to wake up to how amazing and capable and compassionate and insightful and intuitive, all of those qualities, for humanity to wake up to the glory of who they are and live from that perspective. Will that do?
That's perfect and beautiful, and yes, awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Petrea, today. It's been a delight, and I love where our conversation went, and we definitely touched on many topics, which I feel many people will reflect on. So I will leave in the show notes if anyone wants to get in contact with Quest or feel that that's where they need to be. That will all be in the show notes so they can connect with you. And thank you again so much for your time.
That's a real pleasure, Catherine. Thank you so much for having this time with me.
Thank you for listening to Willow Healing Matters, the podcast. We have so much love and gratitude that you have taken the time out of your day to empower you on your healing journey. The views shared by the person being interviewed might not necessarily reflect that of the host and should be used at your own discernment. Trust what resonates for you and follow your heart and soul guidance. If you have any underlying medical conditions or mental health issues, please consult with your healthcare provider before pursuing any of the recommendations. Likewise, you can always contact the person being interviewed to find out more information. This can be found in the show notes. Remember to activate, align, heal, empower, and find love in everything that you do.